introduce Marlise and let her have most of the time, but it really is my honor to introduce Dr. Marlise Estella to you today in her presentation. I've known Marlise for a number of years. We've been co-board members for a few years, and I've interacted with her at hero events for a number of times. And I can tell you that I've seen her in action. I've seen her kindness in action. And she is truly one of the most remarkable human beings I've ever met. Uh, there was one instance where she was an observer of an unfolding situation between a couple of people, and there was some tension in the air. And Marlise, expertly, with wisdom and compassion and kindness, was able to take those people aside and diffuse the situation in a remarkable fashion. And it's a moment I'll never forget. So she is well qualified to be leading a presentation and discussing the concept of kindness and the impact that it can make. Marlise is a physician. She also has been involved in corporate America for a number of years as chief medical officer for a number of well-known large organizations around the world. She's also got a passion for innovation and certainly kindness. So that's going to be her theme today. Again, I'll direct you to her full bio at the Hero Forum Speaker website. But with that, I'm going to pass it off to Marlise.
Thank you, Stephen. And hello, everyone. I should begin by saying, and Marlise is also emotional because I was about to cry when Stephen said those kind things about me. Sometimes you wonder if people notice the small things where you are hoping to have an impact. And Stephen, I can't tell you how much that means to me for you to remember that and to recognize it. So, Hero, it is great to be with you today to explore a truth that I've come to know. And before we get to that, however, I do want to let you know how excited I am to be here. Every year, I look forward to being at the Hero Conference with great anticipation. In part, it's because usually there is a trio of us, Karen, Stephen, and Paul, who get up to either play the Blues Brothers or somebody else and kick off the forum with a song. So I greatly miss that we weren't able to do that today. But there are some other pluses with being able to join you virtually. I am beaming in from Houston, Texas, and it's a pretty glorious day here. It's warm if you like hot weather, not a cloud in the sky. And I can't think of a better way to spend an afternoon of learning than with you. Now, I want you to imagine for a moment if I hadn't given my truly authentic intro, and if I'd started the conversation by saying, "Hold on, guys, I'm having some technical difficulty here, so just give me a minute. We'll get through this somehow." I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel like over the last week, somebody threw cold water and a wet blanket over the country, and it has just been horrible. But I'm going to try to put that out of my mind, and we'll do this presentation, okay? Okay. So same setting and same people. But if depending on which intro I had given, it sets the stage for something very different. With the first one, you could probably feel my anticipation, my excitement, my enthusiasm. It may have made you smile seeing me smile. And it may have made you lean in and think, oh gosh, maybe this presentation is going to be better than I thought it was. And with the other one, you might have thought, well, she doesn't seem that motivated to share this information. She seems distracted, and I don't know, maybe I'll be able to cut out of this one a little early. I say that to say that words are powerful in communication, but it sets up the intro to this conversation, which is that words are more than communication. They are powerful in the way that they impact our body neurologically, physiologically. And we're going to explore a bit of that today. So I've got someone who is advancing the slides for me. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So what I hope to cover in this next hour and leave some time for discussion at the end is the science behind words and health, i.e. what do words do? words and how they impact our physical health outcomes, words and the connection between our mental health and our emotional well-being. And then we'll get to how do we use words as practical strategies if I'm saying that words truly are our medicine. So let's go progress to the next one. You heard a little bit about my background, but I think it's important to kind of walk you through my path. As you heard, I'm a corporate medical physician. I trained in internal medicine at the University of Rochester and have spent all of my practical experience as an occupational health physician in some of the largest, most influential companies in the world. And my job has been to protect the safety of these employees and their well-being. I've been at it for over 20 years and I've seen a lot of things, but I can visibly remember in 2015, something felt very different. And if you can think back to me, 2015 was at the height of the Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump election. And I remember being called into a meeting where we were having to look at a disciplinary action between two employees who had gotten into a fight. And it was around the election. These two people had very opposing political views and got into a fight in the break room. And unfortunately, incidents like that were beginning to increase. And I noticed that there was a change, not only in the workplace, but in society at large. People were beginning to feel more polarized, more fragmented. Colleagues at work who used to eat together stopped socializing because they couldn't figure out a way to navigate their differences. And on the days where there were going to be the political debates, oh my goodness, it felt like you were walking on eggshells the day before and the day after. And I remember thinking that I would be so glad when the election came in November because maybe we'd go back to pre-election norms. And it's not to say that that was necessarily a panacea, but it certainly wasn't, people weren't fighting in the break room at that time. And of course, we all know now that instead of that being the end, that was the inception of what I think has been a rise in incivility in this country. I stayed in corporate America, saw this increasing, and I guess in about 2020, 21 during the pandemic, I thought, oh my God, this is even more serious than I thought. Perhaps incivility really is a public health threat. And the reason that I began to frame it in that way is because I noticed that we were more anxious as a society. My patients that I was seeing in the clinic were more expressing more feelings around anxiety and depression, fear. And I also saw it as a vulnerability in that we weren't sharing the same information around truth. And it's it is true that when people are polarized and fighting against each other, I think it also poses a national security threat because we're focused on each other. Who knows what the enemy outside could be thinking? And I thought, well, maybe we're going at this the wrong way. Our politicians can't seem to solve it, but perhaps if we're able to frame it as a public health issue, we may have more success in getting people to understand that words are impactful and they really do impact it's not just about being polite or nice. It impacts our health. Let's go on to the next slide. So when we talk about the science behind words and health, it's really important to understand what's happening when language is being processed. Let's move to the next slide. Some of this will be a recap of what you've heard in previous presentations, but some of it will be a little bit of a deeper dive on the physiology. So in language processing, I'm going to take you to a little bit of medical school here. There are two really important regions in the brain to be aware of. The first is the frontal lobe, and that's here in the front of the brain. One of them is Broca's area, and Broca's area is in the left portion of the frontal lobe. And Broca's area is where language is produced. So it's where words are formed, and it's where we're able to articulate what it is that we're thinking. Now, the second area that you need to know about is in the temporal lobe. Temporal lobes are on the side, and Wernicke's area is in the left temporal lobe. So, what happens there? And all of I have to also say that I love words. So, anything that sounds unusual, like Wernicke, I perked up when I was in school. But that is where understanding of language takes place. So, you form words in Broca's areas, and in Wernicke's part of the brain, it's where you understand what people are saying to you. Those two areas are critical, but you should also be aware that there are other neural pathways that connect Broca's area with Wernicke's area and other areas of the brain. And those are the arcuate fasciculus. What does all of that mean? It means basically that words trigger physiologic responses that get connected to our emotions, to our memory, and to our actions, which is why I really do believe we need to start thinking of it as something that has the ability to impact health. Thus, words really are medicine. Language is a physiological force. Let's go to the next slide. So you've been hearing about this one all morning, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what is this amygdala. And again, as somebody who loves words, I remember when I first heard it in medical school, I thought, wow, what an interesting word. What does that thing do? Well, that little thing in the brain is kind of our emergency alarm detection center. The amygdala is a small almond-shaped group of neurons that is always scanning our environment looking for threats. So when you hear a harsh word or something that's threatening, it perks up, it sends signals that sets off a cascade of physiologic reactions that lead you to have to make a decision about whether or not or how you are going to respond to said threat. Working with the in the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala is tied into our decision making and our emotions, and thus our actions. So when you have a dysfunction in this area, it can also contribute to an increase in anxiety disorders and fear. And there's an important link between stored memories that we'll talk about in just a bit. Let's go on to the next slide. So, how do words influence brain chemistry? We've heard already about where words are formed, how we understand them, and then what they do. But let's specifically talk about the effect of positive words. So, when you hear positive words like good job and a host of others, they set off a release of a lot of neurotransmitters in the brain. Some of them you may be familiar with, like dopamine. And dopamine is associated with motivation and reward. So, generally, when you, except in some disease states with dopamine, generally when it's raised, it's a good thing that it's raised. When you hear positive words, it also increases serotonin. And I know all of you have probably heard about serotonin. It's the thing that makes us feel really good. It's associated with that runner's high. And part of what helps antidepressants be so effective because many of them work by increasing levels of serotonin in the brain. And also, when you hear positive words, it has a leveling effect on cortisol. And cortisol is the thing that we always really want to control, preferably in a downward fashion, because that means we are managing and monitoring our stress levels appropriately. So, again, when you hear positive words, it does a lot of good things. So, it's kind of easy to understand that negative words do the opposite. They decrease dopamine, do decrease a sense of being valued and reward. They also make you feel more threatened and less of a sense of well-being. So you're not getting that serotonin boost. And that's when negative words also lead to a rise in those stress levels. Next slide, please. So let's go on to talk about what research says about verbal interactions with our family, our friends, and coworkers, and our stress responses. And I'm just going to keep up here with some of my information on the side. We've looked at supportive roles of these parties that I've told you about. And if you think about affirmations, which I'll come to in just a moment, supportive language has been shown to reduce stress, and it's also been shown to lower cortisol levels, improving health and resilience. And harsh language has the opposite effect. I wrote down some notes around some studies. Positive affirmations in earlier studies were shown to cause a measurable increase in salivary immunoglobulin A. And immunoglobulin A is an immune marker that says that when you get positive, supportive verbal interactions, it actually improves your immune function, your ability to fight off colds and flus and disease. In other studies, persons who receive verbal support from loved ones had both a decrease in their cortisol level and in self-reported anxiety levels. So we are able to visibly measure that hearing positive words is actually having a physiologic effect. These aren't just nice things to do, they are actually improving and moving health. And in a study in 1985, we were able to demonstrate that people with an optimistic mindset, those who felt like they could expect good things because of affirmations and positive words, had better outcomes in their surgeries. So the immune system is positively primed. You're expecting good things to happen. And to a certain extent, all of this helps to prime your body to have a more positive health outcome. Let's go on to the next slide. So words and physical health outcomes. So did you know, and we'll move to the next one. We've just talked about the positive effect of affirmations on your immune response, but did you know that words can also have an impact on your perception of pain? And that's because words impact your stress response, which can make you feel a heightened sense of pain, even when you're not actually experiencing it. In a clinical setting, if a patient hears that I've got to give you a shot and this is going to hurt, they actually expect it to hurt more than it will. And studies have also shown that when patients hear sort of things that jar them, in some studies it showed that they will feel like they need more pain medication for a procedure, even if the procedure doesn't take place. They're anticipating feeling it, and it makes them demand more medication in kind. So, and that was proven in a study in Science in 2007. So these are very important things for doctors to consider in a clinical setting. And my takeaway with that is it's important to have very open and honest communication with your patient about their outlook. But as a physician, it's also important to balance that with things that are more favorable and to talk about the positives of a treatment and let patients know that they are going to be supported through a process. That actually gets back, let's go to the next slide. Um, the effect of negative language on the body. As I said, it can increase your perception of pain. It has also been shown to slow recovery from illness. And all of that is very important in the clinical setting. I want to take you, as I mentioned, I went to the University of Rochester School of Medicine. I went a long time ago in the late 80s. And this is important because at the time, the University of Rochester was one of the few schools that really focused on the mind body connection. In fact, it was seen almost as unusual that that much of the curriculum was focused on it. But at the beginning, as a first and second year medical student, when we were learning about the disease processes and the mechanisms behind them, there was also a focus on why you need to understand the patient's environment, where they come from, what their background is, what their social situation is. Dr. Harding covered a lot of that in her talk. There was a class that was also central to that, and it was the Introduction to Human Health. And in that class, physicians, young growing physicians, were taught the importance of language and interviewing. And had we been in person today, one of the exercises that I would have taken you through would have been one on how to learn active listening. I think that was covered probably on yesterday, but I'll just describe a little bit of the exercise to let you know how that informs part of what I'm talking about today. So in this exercise, we had to face another medical student and let them talk without interruption, and then leave a sizable gap in time before you responded. The gap was to allow the person to think of something else they might want to say. Oftentimes in a clinical setting, we cut people off, and there might be more information forthcoming. But it was also a way to demonstrate that you are listening, that you care, and it was an important way to establish trust. And all of that to say is to say that listening is a part of this conversation around words, words as medicine, and using compassionate language has a very important role in the doctor patient relationship, and also in the setting, in the workplace setting. Let's go on to the next slide. So, therapeutic communications in the healthcare setting, as I was just saying, when you communicate with empathy and compassion, it strengthens the provider and patient relationship. And one of the things, as I said, it helps to establish trust, but it's also been shown to help with medication and treatment adherence. There have been studies that showed that doctors who treated people with diabetes, if they had high scores in their ratings around empathy, their patients tended to have better blood glucose control and better outcomes with their diabetes. And part of that, it's because they felt supported, and they also knew that the doctor, they felt that they could trust with the treatment plan that they were given. And overall, when a provider was positive, encouraging, supportive, and in their communication, those patients also had better outcomes. So not only is this important in just general society, if you are a provider, compassionate communication, the selective use of certain words can be very, very important into how your patient follows the regimen, and ultimately the outcome of the treatment on their disease process. Next slide. So let's move on to words and our mental well-being. So one of the things, if you have ever been to therapy, and I personally believe everybody could use a little spin in a therapy chair. But if you've ever been, you know that in a clinical setting, in this clinical setting, clinicians will often use something called cognitive behavioral therapy. And what happens in CBT is the provider gets you to reframe your thought. It helps you to take something that you may find distressing and to see it in a more positive light. And the ultimate effect is to move you from a state of sadness and anxiety to one of optimism, where you're able to better deploy healthier coping skills. So, for example, instead of saying, I'm a failure, if you say something like, well, I made a mistake, but I'm learning from it, that's a far more helpful way to be able to problem solve, forgive yourself if you feel like that's something that you need to do, and to take positive steps towards boosting your mood and taking positive actions. Neuroimaging has also confirmed this as well. So when people are able to reframe their thoughts, there is shown to be an increase in the activation in that prefrontal cortex, and it helps people with problem solving better, and moving from being immobilized or paralyzed by their situation, and being able to problem solve and put a plan in place for um, recovery from whatever it is that they're finding distressing. So, self talk on in mental health. If we were in person, one of the things that I would have asked you to do is to raise your hand if you are someone who talks to yourself. And I'm going to raise both hands because I do. So not only do I talk to myself in my head throughout the day, which most of us do, even though we don't realize we're doing it, when I'm alone at home, I actually have active talk to myself sessions out loud. And one of the things that I discovered with that, and it's been verified, is when you are talking to yourself, your brain doesn't necessarily know the difference that it's you or your best friend or your mother who's telling you something positive. So when I need to feel good about something, when I need to be motivated to help me maybe move on a project, I'll have a conversation with myself that says, "Wow, you really did that well, Marlies. How did, what was the feeling like moving through that?" And it also helps to, when I come in the evening, I think, what I say to myself, what a great day this was. Marlies, what are we going to do to make the evening feel really comfortable in the home? What are we going to have for dinner, and what do we want that to feel like? I know it sounds a little kooky, but I tell you, my doing that in my home and in my life has really given me a sense of control over my mood and my stress level, and I feel primed to be able to accomplish whatever it is that I'm trying to work on. So talking to yourself actually improves your mood. It can help you yourself lower your stress levels, and it can also really help you with your cognitive function. So self-talk affects your ability to concentrate, make better decisions, and to perform better. Let's move on to the next one. I talked to you a little bit about reframing your thoughts, the role of cognitive behavioral health. I think I got a little bit ahead of myself on there, but part of how we use language in mental health therapy is to challenge negative beliefs. So the words that we often tell ourselves are can be things like, I'm a failure, or I didn't do that well, or I'm never going to be able to do that. And this concept of self-talk or having conversations with friends who care or loved ones, all of these things really help to reframe our thoughts and help to move us from and calm the amygdala so that we're not feeling a sense of threat in our environment, that getting dissipating the fight or flight response, and helping us to move to a place where we're able to take positive actions on behalf of ourselves that can move us to a healthier place. And therapeutic dialogue fosters emotional expression and cognitive clarity for mental wellness. One of the other things that I wanted to add about reframing, and a way to do that is through expressive writing. So if you don't feel comfortable with talking out loud to yourself, expressive writing is another way to do that. To write what you're feeling, to write what it is that you desire, and they can have the same effect as audible speech as well. Let's move to the next slide. So the power of affirmations and encouragement. I don't know if many of you have heard of an author named Iyanla Van Zant. She had been on the Oprah show years ago, and then she was on the OWN network. She had a show called Iyanla Fix My Life, and Iyanla was brought in to fix some pretty messy lives. But before she became known through Oprah, she had a cult following amongst Black women. She wrote these books called Acts of Faith. And Acts of Faith were these little paperback books that were filled with self affirmations. She's the first person that I knew that had ever published something like that. And I tell you, her books were like they were like Bibles in Black women's homes. Everybody had these acts of faith. And some people thought, yeah, those are kind of feel good, lightweight things. But Iyanla has been proven right. There is a theory that supports this, and it was developed by a researcher by the name of Claude Steele. And Claude Steele said that what affirmations do is they increase our sense of regard for ourselves. They make us feel that we are the best versions or can be the best version of ourselves. And again, this is not woo woo. This is backed in science. So affirmations activate the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, and that's the brain, the part of the brain that's involved in self processing and reward and valuation, or how we value ourselves. And they also are involved in this process of reframing threats, lowering stress. And when you do this, when you receive affirmation, it also puts you in a place where you're able to receive critical feedback. And let's go to the next slide, because this is something that I think is really important to understand in the world of work. Let's progress one more. So, I've told you that I'm a corporate occupational medicine physician, which means I have spent part of my world in on the medical side, leading medical teams in these large organizations. But I, like you, have been an employee who is subject to performance appraisals. And I'm not afraid to admit that I kind of hate them. I don't like them. And the reason I don't like them, and I'm sure many of you have heard this phrase that feedback is a gift. Well, the way that some of that feedback has been given to me, I wanted to say, you could have kept that gift. I did not need that kind of gift today. And it's because people often don't know how to give this critical feedback in the workplace. And after performance appraisals, I tell you, it's probably one of the busiest times of year for me. And I can't tell you the number of people that come in tears, demoralized, wanting to quit, who begin to activate job service searches, because typically, even if there is the desire for the employee to perform better, they are often laced with more criticism than they are praise. And this is because it's sometimes tied to a metric. Everyone can't be outstanding in the spread of things. So if you have 5 people that perform the same, generally with the way these things work, everyone can't get what would be considered the top tier. And you've got to find some justification for why this person was A, B, C, D, or F. And performance appraisals are can sometimes be used as the justification for how that happens. And the negative emotional impact on employees during that time is very, very significant. And it takes people months, sometimes years, to recover from that. So if you are a leader or a manager who is responsible for delivering performance reviews, I do think that they are an opportunity to help develop talent and to point out areas where people have legitimate areas to improve. But the other thing that is critical to remember is that they are also opportunities to boost people's spirits, to let them know what they do well. And if you really want them to hear the feedback about the areas where they improve, make sure that you're balancing it with things that boost confidence, that boost happiness, that are encouraging them and letting them know honestly whether or not they can succeed in the position that they are and the kind of outlook that you see for them in the role. The effects of negative criticism aren't just felt by that employee, but studies have shown that when people are unhappy at work, it also has a negative impact on those that they live with, because we don't cut ourselves off between work and home. Part of what we're feeling in both environments travels with us. So it's important to understand that though feedback can be a gift, it is important to learn how to give it well and to balance it with supportive phrases and things that show legitimate areas where people are performing well. Let's move on to the next one. So, building resilience through supportive language. That's the art of how do we use words to heal us. And I meant to bring down a book that I have today, but I'll just tell you about it. It's one of these words. It's not a thesaurus, but I think the title may be something around words that make you smarter. The bottom line is there are so many words in the world that can describe a range of emotions, and we tend to stick to the same ones. One of the things that I want to challenge you to do is to go out and find a book like that and look for ways to better express yourself and better express yourself in the positive areas. And even if you have to say something negative, to find words that more accurately reflect what it is that you are truly trying to say. Because if communication is misinterpreted, you may as well have kept it for yourself if it's not driving the desired result that you want. What does supportive communication look like? It's using kind language, but it's using language that gives you a sense of psychological safety. Can I trust what you're saying? Are you activating my amygdala? Are you trying to hurt me? Or are you really trying to help me in that exchange? And that's what we're always trying to do when we face a conversation where there may be a harsh tone or harsh language being used. When we are using words, it's also important to understand that language can be used to help us develop coping skills. And when we are compassionate in our exchange, it transfers to the other person and can really be useful in helping people to overcome challenges. And finally, supportive communication is what we need if we're trying to build emotional strength. Supportive language boosts our emotional resilience, and it gives people the sense that they can overcome adversity effectively. Let's go to the next one. So, how do you manage your relationships with this mindful, supportive communication? You first want to work on building trust. And in that top photo where I would have challenged you to do this in person, to sit across from someone, look them in the eye, listen to them without interrupting. Even though we can't do it in this session, I'm going to ask you to practice it with someone at home or someone in your personal life and see what that feels like. See what it feels like to really lock eyes with someone as they're talking, to not interrupt, and to allow a pause to see if something else comes. It can feel very uncomfortable if you've not done it before, but it really is the way to train yourself to be a better listener and therefore to be able to lean in with empathy and compassion. When you're able to get to that space of empathy and compassion, you're able to provide more emotional support to the person that you're with, and it's the foundation of building healthy relationships, reducing conflict, and having stronger interpersonal bonds. Let's go to the next one. So, practical strategies for using words as medicine, active listening, building trust, thoughtful word choice. So, I don't know if we can do this using the chat, but um, let me see if you were trying to encourage an employee that was going through a difficult time. I'd like to see in the chat, what are things that you could say to that person? I'm going to turn my chat on and just see what you guys are saying. I'll start it off. Um, if you need some support, I'm there for you. What are ways that we can show support through a coworker that's going through something difficult? What might you say? So I'm not seeing anything in the chat. There we go. You're a valued colleague. How can I help? I love that one, Stephen. You could also say something like, you know, I've seen you work through difficult things before. Remember with that project of so and so and so? I think if you do the same things, you may have similar success. So looking at past history, reminding people of something that they've accomplished before can be a very effective way to motivate them. Joni's writing, I'm noticing you don't seem quite yourself today. Are you doing
Can
okay?
you hear me?
Yes. Inquiring, asking the person about how they're feeling. That's probably better than assuming they're not doing okay. Are there any others? I'm going to just leave it open. If you come up with any other things that you think might be good to share, please fill it in the chat. But this is what I think is going to be important to change the tone in our workplaces, in our communities, in our home. We need to speak a bit more positivity and kindness and encouragement into each other's lives. Let's go to the next slide. So, again, the benefits of positive self-talk, practicing positive talks builds inner strength, enhances personal well-being, and offering kind words encourages connection and supportive community. One of the things I want to tell you a little story about a time when I was going through a very difficult period in my life. It was after my divorce. I'd moved into downtown Washington, D.C. And if you've been through divorce or you know someone who's been through divorce, you know it can be a very difficult time. And one morning I came out, I was walking to the train and went into McDonald's to get coffee. And there were a lot of homeless people. And I just sort of decided that I was going to buy coffee for everyone that morning. And it was a chilly morning and they were so appreciative. They got a boost from it, but I got, I think, an even bigger boost by seeing how something so small could have an impact. So that led to more coffee buying. A couple of times I brought down warm clothing to be able to give to some of them. That was the beginning of something that I later called kindnessizing. So, what is kindnessizing? Kindnessizing is intentionally exercising kindness through words and deeds. And it has become something that I do on a daily basis. I kindnessize to myself. I tell myself really beautiful things about myself. I kind of size to others doing the same. And I typically, every day, I find one thing that I'm going to do anonymously for someone. It could be something as simple as making sure that I'm going to give encouragement to someone. Sometimes it's every time I go to a door, if there's someone behind me, I'm going to wait and hold the door open for them. Sometimes it might be paying for someone's lunch and they don't know who paid for it. But it is what I have found is from the beginning of buying those coffees is that you can train yourself to be kinder. It's not where everyone starts, but by exercising some form of kindness on a consistent basis, it's like you are building a muscle. And that's why I really want and need your help with driving this message around words being medicine and connecting it to how it's impacting the health of not only individuals, us as individuals, but our communities and our country. And it's going to start with really small things, making a decision to say something kind in public or encouraging in public. And I have to tell you that sometimes when I do it, I get really strange looks like, what is she on? Why is she bringing all this good energy in this setting? And I don't necessarily feel like it. It's because I think we are getting so accustomed to being weighed down by negative words, angry voices in the media that we consume that we become a little numb to it. And we don't necessarily get those positive doses like we used to because of the algorithms in the social media that we consume. The loudest, angriest voices get the most notice. So we need an army of people who are really going to channel this, take this, and it starts. I'm not asking for us to go out and try to change the world on a broad scale. Let's start at home. Let's start in the workplace. Find something kind, encouraging that you can say to yourself, that you can say to your coworker, that you can say to your church member, say to some stranger at the health club, and let's watch how this blossoms and turns into a more positive movement around influencing society with words. Let's go to the next one.
And I think our facilitator, slide facilitators, needs to move to another meeting soon. So if there's a few more slides, just wanted to give you a heads up.
All right, I think this is probably going to be the last one, and I'm going to open it up for some dialogue on. So respectful communication, remember that is key, and I want it to give some examples of what that looks like when we're trying to deploy words in a more useful and helpful way. Um, let's see here. I'm blocked by this by part of the screen with the faces, but I'm going to try to read some of it. Basically, instead of when you disagree with someone, I think we need to be honest about how we disagree, but there are some things that we can say instead that invites more dialogue versus pushes it away. So instead of saying, well, I think you're wrong, you can say, tell me more. I see things differently, but I'd really like to understand your rationale because I can see that this is important to you. You can be encouraging. Some of the things that will add to the list is I've got your back. Or when someone says something that really is insightful, say, that was very insightful of you, or I was glad that you stood up in that way. I admire you taking a stand, or you really made us feel good today. And let me tell you, if you have a boss, bosses probably receive the least amount of positive feedback. So, one thing I'd encourage you to do is find something good that you can say to your boss about your boss and make sure you share it because they get a ton of stuff that isn't very good. And finally, mindful communication. I think this is something that you've heard in some of the conversations before. Ask yourself, is this the time to say this? Is this the place to say it? And what purpose is it serving? Because if the timing isn't right, if it's the wrong setting, and if there is even the slightest hint of malice in what you're going to say, you might want to keep that one. So I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions. And if there aren't any questions, I also want to hear from you all about what you think we can do to raise this issue as more of a health issue. How do we get it into the popular domain and get people to understand that the language we are using isn't just rude or curt, it's actually negatively impacting our health. And if we want to be healthier, it's not just about hitting the gym and getting our steps. It's about speaking health through our words. Back to you, Stephen. Oh, I think we've got you on mute.
Trying to unmute there. Thank you, Marlise. That was an excellent presentation, very powerful, and you covered a lot of ground. I'd like to invite others on the call to turn on their cameras if you wish. Don't have to, but if you wish, and offer your questions. I can get us started. And as I said, you've covered a lot of ground on kindness and words, the power of words. And I was particularly struck by your reference to the self-affirmation theory and Claude Steele's work on that. And in not only in the context of kindness, excuse me, self-kindness, getting ourselves grace, but also perhaps as a effective tool to help people overcome the blocks that they have to behavior change,
Mhm.
giving themselves more self-confidence, self-efficacy, and being able to take the steps that are necessary to move forward. What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, absolutely. And that's kind of where I was going with a bit of this self-talk, that it's a powerful tool to give you just that bit of motivation when you're struggling with self-doubt, when you are struggling to make a change. It could be something as simple as wanting to make dietary changes for your health, but thinking, I'm not going to be able to do it because my husband cooks and he isn't interested in cooking something that's healthy. I may not be able to take breaks and have access to the food that I need. If you're able to use these affirmations and encourage yourself and say to yourself, there, it may take a little more effort, but there are some things that I have control of in my environment that can help me accomplish that goal. And sometimes the truth is, you may be the only person who is your cheerleader. And that's why I think with this self-talk with me, I had to encourage myself to, in times of loneliness, when my mom isn't there, when my best friend isn't there, I've got to be my own best friend. So the girl does a lot of self-talking.
Thank you for that. Any other questions from participants? And if not, Marlise, I know you said you wanted to try some things out on us, so back to
Well,
you.
actually, I was really interested in, and I'm going to push the audience a little bit to give me some feedback, um, because this question of what we do to create a civil society, and I do think it has to do with words. Is there anything that comes to mind, even small things? What is it that you think we could be missing? I feel one of the reasons I love coming to Hero it's because I feel like I'm meeting my tribe. The downside of it is because I am with my tribe, I don't know if the message is getting out. And you all, this is something that is deeply important to me. So important that I went out and wrote a whole song about it. The kindness is contagious when you heard it. And the reason I wrote that song was I thought, well, I'm speaking to my colleagues, I'm speaking at conferences, but I'm not reaching the audience that I want. So maybe if I write a slightly quirky song called Kindness is Contagious, I'll be able to reach a different audience. But I think we are really at a critical point, not only in this nation, but in this world. And I ask earnestly, even if you can't come up with something today on this call, if you can think about it, I'd really appreciate your emailing me because this is something that I really want to figure out a way to have some impact on. I think the health and happiness of not only our generation, but future generations depends on us being able to move the needle in this area.
Mhm. I'll share my first reaction is if we could erase one word from the lexicon of life, it would be hate. And if we could just get rid of that word and everything that relates to it, I think that would could move us in directions that we need to move in. But I know we can't remove that word. I know it's there, but the concept that belies it and the feelings that it emotes are the things that I think are challenging our society. And I certainly agree with everything you said about the tipping point that we may be at.
Thank you, Stephen.
We have about a minute. We're coming up on the last 30 seconds. So if no other
What's
thoughts, oh, please.
Hello, thank you for the presentation, and I just wanted to say, so in my city of Littleton, they have what's called a long table, and they invite 5,000 people, and you don't sit with someone you know. So they're teaching connectivity and belonging within this whole, you
Mm,
know, it's a
mhm,
nonprofit organization. They hold that to, you know, support each other in the community. So
mm.
yeah, it's something that they just started last year, and I was just
Okay.
looking at it, and they're having one this month. So
And what's it called?
it's called long table longer tables Littleton.
Longer Tables Littleton.
Yeah, Longer Tables Littleton is join Lift Up Littleton member organizations. It's a nonprofit, faith, communities, business, civic, education, healthcare, along with the city of Littleton. That's where I live.
Hmm.
And they do those type of things just to,
Is
you
that
know,
Colorado?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
Littleton, Colorado.
I
Yeah, so
used to work there. All right. Thank you for that.
yeah. So that's just an idea that, from a community point.
And maybe I'll just share Dana's comment in the text in the chat box. I think in the world today, collectively, we don't really understand why we feel so disheartened. We need to see and give kindness, words in parentheses, but many don't know how to help with incivility.
Thank you, Dana.
All right, that we've come to the end of our session. Again, Marlies, it was enlightening. Thank you for your presentation today. Thank you for your song and music video this morning, which send us off to a great start. For those of you who are participating and need continuing education credit, remember to complete the survey at the end of this session and look forward to seeing you in other chat rooms throughout the day.